Okay, good evening everyone. So, hi everyone that's just joining the live stream. We've got about just a minute till we get going. Just checking everything was all working there. Okay, so just about 30 seconds till we get rolling. And I'll do a proper introduction. So get yourselves ready, guys. Here we go. So for anybody that's new to these sessions, I'll be rolling around about 2 watts per kilo. Use this ride however you want, really. Take it nice and easy, or you can push it on from the front. We've got the rubber banding effect on, so that will hopefully keep most of us all together. But yeah, so I'll do a proper introduction now that hopefully everything's running nice and smoothly. So welcome to this evening's Monday Assembly Ride. My name is Rich, I'm the founder and head coach at RIAK Fitness. We're ostensibly a triathlon and cycling coaching outfit. We look after all kinds of crazy endurance athletes. We've got a really special session this evening, guys. We're joined by the team at Total Endurance Nutrition. So we've got Vicky and Sam joining us this evening, and I'll be doing just a couple of little bits of admin before I do an introduction for those guys. So those people that join these sessions regularly, just a quick FYI, there's no sessions next week. I'm away. When I do come back, there's going to be a little bit of a change to the scheduling, to the timetabling. No changes to the Monday sessions. They'll stay as they are now. There will be a couple of changes to the Wednesday session. So this week is actually the final session in our Discovery series. That's our Wednesday evening session. And we're starting a new series in a couple of weeks' time, and it's going to be a bit of a change to the timetable. So we're going to run a Wednesday morning session at 9:30 a.m, which will be live coached, and then there'll be another 6:30 p.m. Wednesday session, which won't have a coach. So basically, as the reason for this is, as we're moving into the summer and our Antipodean friends are moving into their winter, we're looking to support that kind of greater need as they move inside and we move outside. So the new series that we're going to have on a Wednesday evening is called To The Limit, and it's basically a mixed threshold and VO2 type session, basically just pure conditioning work at its finest. So that's the bit of admin, just an FYI. No sessions next week, and then the week after things will be a little bit different, but stay the same for the Monday session. So, bringing us on to tonight's session though. As I said earlier, we're riding the last 35 Ks of Liège-Bastogne-Liège, which was at the weekend, which was an absolute cracker. Particularly the men's race was really good, really interesting. Some not so good stuff as well. But tonight we are joined by Vicky and Sam from Total Endurance Nutrition, which is why we're all here. And Total Endurance Nutrition, or TEN, they're our new training partners, and they are specialist sports nutritionists with a background in academia. So researching and lecturing at Liverpool John Moores University. So basically, the advice that you're getting is pretty cutting edge. Both are endurance athletes, so they know how to apply this stuff as well in terms of the training and all of the demands that endurance sport brings. Now, TEN offer bespoke nutritional advice and coaching with a variety of plan options, including race preparation support and fueling plans. Now, obviously tonight's topic for discussion is race nutrition. Okay, so I really suggest after the session have a look at their website, the link for which is available from the RIAK online page. booking yourself a free consultation, because we're lucky enough to have a session with them, an exclusive session for our squad athletes a couple of weeks ago, and generally it was absolutely fascinating. So hopefully haven't built them up too much, but they're very knowledgeable. They're good at what they do. So I think that's probably enough from me. I think it's Vicky I'm going to hand over to first. Is that right? Yeah. So I'll be quiet and I'll spotlight Vicky. And here we go.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm hoping you can all hear me. So thank you, everyone, for joining the call, and thank you, obviously, Richard, for the introduction. As Richard mentioned, my name is Vicky Edwards, and I'm a physiologist and nutritionist, and I work as a sports nutritionist with Total Endurance Nutrition. So as Richard mentioned, we primarily work with triathletes and endurance athletes, helping them to fuel their training correctly to ensure they're as healthy as they possibly can be, whilst also allowing them to adapt and perform well. So like Richard mentioned, I'm also a triathlete myself, primarily within Olympic and middle distance triathlons. I mention this just because it really helps massively to empathise with our athletes, as well as just kind of giving little hints and tips that we find useful. So what I'm going to kind of speak about today is I'll give you a bit of an overview of kind of what I'm going to outline. So I do have one slide. I don't know if Richard can chuck that on, just saves you kind of staring at my face. So if that's used, so I do have one slide. I'm not going to flick through slides because I'm aware that people are cycling. So rather than kind of staring at a screen, and kind of trying to look at the slide, you can maybe take a screenshot and then use the hints and tips from that. So I'll go through this talk and then we can have a load of questions at the end. And if you want to write the questions in the box or kind of shout them out after, that's not a problem. And like Richard said, Sam's on the call as well. So if there's anything I can't answer, Sam's can chip in. So firstly, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the basics around nutrition and physiology, and this will be a very quick and very basic overview just to give you some context as to why you need to fuel the way you do. Once done that, I'll talk about the pre-race fueling. So this will be race week, including carb loading, and then the morning of the race. And then we'll talk about race day nutrition. So this will include short course and long course. And then finally, some post-race nutrition. So just going on to the basics of nutrition, this will just discuss the physiology around it and mainly talking about the energy sources. So the main energy sources we use when we exercise is carbohydrates and fat. And these are in stored forms in our body, which we then get from our food that we eat. So in our body, we have around 50,000 calories as stored fat. However, as carbohydrate stores are a lot smaller in our body, and this represents around 2,500 calories, which can be around about like 90 to 120 minutes of hard effort, or around 2 to 3 hours at maybe like an Ironman pace. So when we exercise, we use both these stored forms of energy. Carbohydrates are the more readily available, so we use these for the high intensity or sudden bouts of effort. And then fat is our less readily available stored form of energy, and we use this on the lower intensity work. So just to mention, we don't use just one or the other. It's on a bit of a sliding scale. So there'll be a ratio between the two, and possibly on the higher intensity efforts, you'll be using more carbs and some fat. And then obviously on the lower intensity efforts, it'll be the other way around. So primarily fats, but you will be using carbs as well. So you may have heard of the term hitting the wall or bonking, and this is essentially the point in which your body runs out of stored glycogen and primarily relies on your fat stores. So if you've ever experienced this, it's quite frankly pretty horrible. You feel pretty rubbish, and your ability to maintain any intensity will severely drop. So when we run out of glucose, which is the stored form of the readily available for to maintain its power and intensity, which we might need to say get uphill or finish that race. So what I'm trying to get at here is carbs are our optimal fuel source on endurance events, and it's really important that we want to make sure we get the most out of this to get the best possible performance. So I'll also just mention here as well that during training, we can do something called getting slightly fat adapted. And this means that we just learn to optimize the fat stores a bit better when it comes to race day. And we utilize the fat stores and use those carbs for the higher intensity areas. But that is a completely different talk in itself, and that obviously needs to be done during training and not done during race week. So if you are going to do that, then obviously that needs to be done all in training, and leave race week for everything you know. So going on to before the race, so this is looking at the week before and the day before. So just to emphasize the point that just like your training here, you will have practiced your nutrition. So we do nothing for the first time. So nutrition needs to be practiced over and over again prior to race day, so that you can really understand what your body needs and how it responds well and what type of food it responds well to. So the first thing I'm going to kind of talk about is carb loading. And in other words, this is just maximizing our body's carb stores before starting the race. So like I mentioned, our body only has a small reserve of carbs, so we need to make sure we've topped this up to the very brim before starting that race. Carb loading, some people might sound, say, like a big bowl of pasta prior to the race, but it really needs to be done earlier than this, and it can be done around 36 to 48 hours before. So at this point, training also would have slowed right down as well. So intensity won't be as high and you won't be using those carb stores as much. So it's important that we do this when training intensity is very low. So during this time as well, we want to be aiming for around 10 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, possibly more for some people, depends on kind of how you feel. So for a 60 kilogram female, for instance, this can be around 600 grams of carbs. For an 80 kilogram male, around 800 grams of carbs or more, if you can cope with that. And that sounds like a lot, and quite frankly, it is a lot of carbs. So because of that, we want to be trying to avoid lots of high fat foods, fiber rich foods. And this is mainly because fibrous foods can be quite filling. So we want to try and avoid that feeling of being really full and getting bloated, and instead get lots of slow release carbs in instead. So also we want to spread out that carbohydrate intake throughout the day. So obviously you're not going to fit in 600 to 800 grams of carbs in the evening. So you want to be primarily probably front loading this to the beginning of the day, so that you're not having a huge bowl of pasta or a huge bowl of rice, for instance, just before you go to bed, because you probably understand what it's like to go to bed on a massively full stomach and you're not going to sleep very well. So trying to fit it in between breakfast, lunch and the afternoon, and then having a small amount in the evening as well. And this will really help to allow the body to digest the food as well as getting a really good night's sleep. So like I mentioned earlier, at this point, there shouldn't be any hard training. So it should be really light on our training that week. So we want to try and avoid any calorie deficits here. So this isn't the time you want to be losing weight. It's all about performance at this point. So don't think just because you're doing little exercise and low intensity exercise that you need to be eating less. It really needs to be focused on maintaining a calorie surplus, or maintaining that calorie kind of a normal level, and then just no weight loss and getting the right amount of carbs in. So then you've done your carb loading leading up to the last meal before race day, which is going to be your dinner. Once again, that wants to be a high top-ups of carbs with a slow releasing energy. And most importantly, don't just go and eat something that you've never had before, because you really want to be eating something that you know that your body responds well to the next day. So just to emphasize that point over and over again, practice this and practice your carb loading before you do race day. So when you do like long endurance rides, maybe practice some carb loading in the weeks following those, and practice your evening meal as well. So I'm going to mention hydration during this week as well, as this is a really important point, as you want to make sure you're hydrated every single day, and you don't want to be going into the race feeling dehydrated. So make sure you sip on water throughout the day, and you can keep an eye on your hydration levels just through the colour of your urine as a really simple guide. So this should be really clear in colour or quite light in colour. If you're getting dark urine or kind of brownish urine, you're likely to be dehydrated. So that can be a really clear indicator of how hydrated you are. You may also feel thirstier during this time too. This is mainly because carbohydrates store 2 to 3 grams of water per gram of carb. So because obviously you're eating more carbs, you're going to be intaking more water, and you might just feel a bit thirstier. Also, just a final point, and this isn't really about nutrition, but this is just about hydration. So if you're going to a race abroad, or even in England, to be honest, and it's a really hot race or really hot day, and it's really worth considering kind of what you're doing the day before. So don't go around and sunbathe or go kind of in the sun looking at loads of buildings around the area or something, because if you're going to spend that hours in the sun, you're going to get dehydrated and sunburnt. So it's really worth considering what you do the day before, just to kind of try and avoid that dehydration. So we've done the carb loading, and now obviously it's race day. So typically we'd recommend athletes to have breakfast 3 to 4 hours before race day. However, obviously for a full or half distance event, they usually start around 7 in the morning. So no one really wants to be eating breakfast at 3 or so in the morning. So that could be quite unrealistic. So it's important that you get in something prior to your race. And as a kind of a rule of thumb, we want to be aiming for around 1 gram of carbs per kilogram of body mass per hour. So as an example, if you eat 4 hours before your race, try and eat 4 grams per kilo of carbs in that meal. But if you're eating 2 hours before, have 2 grams per kilo of body mass. So importantly, this is not fueling your race. This is purely just topping up your top carb stores. And again, this also needs to be practiced. So if you're not used to eating, say if you want to eat 4 hours before, if you're not used to eating at 3 or 4 in the morning, practice it, because it's really, you're going to wake up at 3 in the morning, not be hungry, so and not be able to stomach certain food. So make sure you do practice that during your training, and it will allow you to know how your body handles eating at that time in the morning too. So we want to be focusing on carbs here. So low fiber food, low fat food, and like a low to medium protein intake, but primarily carbs at this point. And this can be something like porridge oats with honey. And I also saw someone the other day had rice pudding that they like to have before. So then it gets to the hour before your race, and this again is just a really quick top up. So this at this point needs to be purely carbs, and this will hopefully get you through that swim if you're doing, say, like a middle to long distance event. This can be quick release carbs at this point as a good start. So for instance, if you can stomach a gel at 7 in the morning, or something like a banana if you can't, even something like a drinks mix with carbs in your water is a good way to get in some carbs in the hour leading up to that race. And that actually leads nicely onto the hydration prior to the race too. So it's really important that we keep hydrated in the morning. So start drinking that water with possibly an electrolyte tablet or a drink mix as soon as you start eating, just to make sure you're really hydrated. And I will mention the electrolytes in a second if no one actually knows kind of what they are and why we want to use them. So before I get on to the actual race nutrition, it's really important to emphasize, as again, like I already have, that this needs to be practiced. So practice the carb loading, practice the early intake of food, and practice the night before nutrition. And I'll probably mention that far too many times, but it's really paramount. So we're going to get to the race nutrition during the event. So this will be very specific to what distance you're actually racing in, and clearly a sprint distance race is going to look very different to an Ironman. So I will outline the fundamentals of the nutrition during the races, and then I'll also mention where it differs for different disciplines. So as I mentioned earlier, carbohydrate stores are limited. So we typically want to be topping these up around an hour or so into exercise. And this isn't allowing our carbohydrate stores to completely deplete and then we're topping them up. We're just keeping them topped up as we go so that they don't get too low. So just to mention sprint triathlon here, as it's a much shorter race, you won't need much nutrition during the course. So if you're planning on completing a sprint in under an hour or just over an hour, you can get away with probably not much fueling during the event itself. However, because it is such a much higher intensity, as obviously the name suggests, it may be beneficial to get in some carbs and to keep up the intensity during both the bikes and the run discipline. And the easiest way to do this is purely through a drinks mix, as it won't take much time out of your race, so you won't be faffing around with a gel or anything like that. Just keep hydrated and keep that carb mix in your drink so you can quickly keep drinking that. For the other disciplines, or anything over, say, 90 minutes, you want to be aiming for around about 60 to 90 grams per kilo of body mass of carbs per hour. And this will start after the first hour of exercise. Now, that's obviously quite handy because first hour for middle distance and Ironman is usually the swim anyway, so we won't be taking in much during this time. The bike leg is where you're going to get most of your nutrition. So this is not only because it's the longer distance of the discipline, but it's also usually the lower heart rate and lower mechanical stress, and the energy is much more easily available. So like I mentioned, we want to be getting in around 60 to 90 grams per hour. This can be more if you can stomach it, and there's no reason why you can't take in more than this. However, any more than this might mean that you're constantly eating. So it's about the practical side of it too. So the range is based on the distance and the kind of the time in which you're doing the event, but it's also how much you can stomach too. So Olympic distance, which is going to take maybe 2 to 3 hours, you might be looking to take in 60 kilograms or maybe less, around 40 if needed, or you're a smaller individual. And then anything over Olympic, you want to be aiming for the top end, so 80 to 90 grams of carbs at the least. This can be broken down into 15 or 20 minute or even half an hour time slots. And you can do this, it is whatever suits you best, really. So if it does suit you to have something every 15 minutes, then that's fine. But if it suits you to take in a larger amount at 30 minutes, then obviously that's completely fine, okay. So as soon as you're out of that swim and on the bike, especially during Ironman, you want to start fueling. Your swim's going to be obviously a lot longer during the Ironman, so you're going to be needing to take in some food straight away. So during a standard distance, you can probably afford to wait until around 45 minutes of maybe total time before you start consuming anything. This might be, say, 15 to 20 minutes after you get on the bike. However, this isn't to say you shouldn't take in anything during that time. It's just if you feel like you could probably keep going for a little bit longer before you take in any food. But that's where the drink mix in the sports bottle is really useful. For longer distance events, getting in the fuel, like I said, after that swim is really essential. So over the bike leg, you'll typically be wanting to get in as much as you can during this time. And this is where you'll be able to store more and obviously eat more as well. So during the long races, which are around 5 and 10 plus hours, eating 90 to 90 grams of carbs per hour is quite a lot. So if you're doing this with all gels and sports drinks and you can handle that, then fine, but that can be quite hard on the stomach. So the bike is the best place to get in a mix of whole foods as well. And this can be, say, through sports bars like Cliff bars, or even things like bananas, saurine loaves. I mean, I took a jam sandwich on mine, so it's very much kind of what's your preference. And when I say try and get in 60 to 90 grams of carbs, in your gels or your drink mixes, this wants to be a mix of glucose and fructose. And the reason we want to get in a mix of these different sugars is because we have different forms of sugars that we use for energy, but these different sugars also have different transporters in our body to get into our blood. So if we can utilize all of the different transporters, we basically have more energy available at a quicker rate. So it also can be quite difficult to carry this all with you. So make use of the bike storage. For instance, you can take the gels to the top bar, the top tubes. I like to stack mine, which is quite handy, and then you can kind of rip them off. But it's also important to check the on-course nutrition if there is any, and then factor this into your race, especially if you don't have a space for all your nutrition. So now we're on to the run nutrition. So when we get to the run, typically if it's going to be hard, it's typically going to be harder to eat as much as we did on the bike, just because we have ingested a lot of carbs during the bike. So our stomach might be a little bit more sensitive, but also we don't have enough storage to carry. So 60 to 90 grams on the run is probably going to be unrealistic. If you can take that much and you can tolerate it on the run, then absolutely, that's brilliant. If you can't, then it's better to eat slightly less than having to walk and having GI issues or having to carry everything. And I know on my Ironman, I put in too many gels in the back of my tri-suit, and actually because I didn't account for this, then my tri-suit was kind of being weighed down slightly, and then it was rubbing on the back of my back, and then I got a load of blisters on my lower back. So things like that you want to kind of be really aware of. So this is also why bike nutrition is essential too, is we want to almost start fueling the run whilst we're on the bike. So the run will typically be when most of our gels are consumed, as we can't really be running with loads of saurine on our pockets or a jam sandwich. So it's important we get in a mix of whole foods on the bike if you have to have whole foods, and then we can stomach some gels on that run. Just like the bike, but even more so on the run, you want to be checking on-course nutrition, as this is likely where you want to be using these. It's important you plan to do this. If you are going to use it, plan to know where the stops are, so know where the nutrition stops are, and know what products they're using, as then you can practice with these, so that you don't want to be using the products on the run or on the race day which you've never used before. So make sure you know what products they're using and practice these in your training. So you don't have to use gels or sports drinks on the run. It just unfortunately isn't optimal to use whole foods, like I said, to carry them as well as having that quick release energy. So sport specific products are useful if you can't stomach loads of gels, as they're easy to absorb and digest. So things like bars, and also things like flat Coke if that is available as yours on the nutrition stops. You obviously can't carry some flat Coke with you, but if they do have that, then that's quite a nice quick energy intake to get in during those nutrition stops. If you also can't have loads of gels, then things like tube locks, so the Cliff tube locks are really good, and you can carry these and they're really accessible, so you can kind of eat one and chew on one every 10 minutes or so. I like to do gel Cliff block, for instance, as that's quite nice to break up loads of gels on your run. So I'll also mention the special needs bag at this point as well, because for Ironman athletes, you'll have the option to use your special need bag. So this will be where you can put extra food, drinks in, socks, whatever you need. What is important though is that you don't rely on this for your nutrition. So don't kind of carry half your nutrition with you and then put half in your special needs bag, because if for sod's law it happens that you miss the where the special needs bag is, or they don't have it, or they give you the wrong one, you don't want to be relying on it. So use it as a bonus rather than a essential. So onto hydration during your race day. So hydration is going to be a hugely important part of your race day and can make or break a race pretty much. So there isn't one size fits all for hydration, and it's kind of whatever best fits you and matches the climate and conditions you're in. So as a rule of thumb, I would always suggest drink to thirst. However, you do need a game plan and you need to know how much you're taking with you. You could also get distracted or worried you're going to drink too little, or other way, you can drink too much because it's hot and humid and your mouth's dry, or you're drinking a load of salt water, for instance, from the swim. So have a bit of a game plan. And as a rule of thumb, that's around about 500 ml of fluid per hour for most people. So you can play around with this in training, see what works best for you, see how much you lose in body weight during training. So you can do a sweat test, or you could even do an actual sweat test with someone online, and they can actually see how much salt you sweat out. So if you do need to do this during training, that's a really useful guide. So there's different strategies you can use for your hydration and nutrition, but typically I would recommend a carb mix in your drink. This will mainly just allow you to get in some easy carbs frequently, and will save you loads of space for carbs on the bike. But it's primarily based on your fueling strategy. So whatever you prefer to use. If you just want to use gels and food, then fine. But obviously, if you do have a carb mix in there, then you can take that into account in your fueling strategy. So you can use a carb and drink mix, which is useful, or you can use water and an electrolyte. And when I say electrolytes, what I mean is salt. So a critical point on this is to not have water on its own. So this is mainly because when you sweat, you lose sodium, and sodium is useful for loads of bodily functions. So just like the carbs that you need to replace, you also need to replace that sodium. So if you drink too little, the sodium content in your body can get too high and you'll get dehydrated, which most of us obviously know about. However, you can do it the opposite way too. So if you drink too much water, you can dilute the amount of sodium in your body and you can then become overhydrated. And this is called hyponatremia, which can be just as detrimental as being dehydrated. So the current guidance is to drink at least 250 milligrams of sodium per 500 ml of water. And like I said, you can do a sweat test and you can get these online, because some people do need more, especially if you say like a salty sweater, but some people need less too. So it's a really good starting point of 250 milligrams. But if you would like to obviously test this, then that's quite useful in training. So a good point of to get in your electrolytes is maybe just to chuck it in your carb mix as well. Some mixes do already have them in, so it's worth checking whether they do have that 250 milligrams of sodium in that per 500 ml of water. Some packets do say salt rather than electrolytes. So when they say salt, this stands for sodium chloride, which actually is 60% chloride and 40% sodium. So if it does say 1 gram of salt, you know that there's 400 milligrams of sodium in there as a bit of a guidance. So I'm also going to mention caffeine obviously at this point as well, because caffeine is incredibly useful for athletes, and there's loads of studies suggesting that it will reduce perception of pain, fatigue, and also can provide alertness. So using caffeine products in the race can be really useful. And this isn't say stop and have a coffee. I'm talking about caffeine gels and caffeine products in our sports specific nutrition products. But because caffeine can also cause GI issues, it is worth possibly using these towards maybe the end of the race, and also just practicing them, like I've mentioned many times, during your training, just to know that if your body can cope with caffeine or how much it can cope with. So in terms of a guideline of how much you should have for caffeine, you want to be aiming probably for around 1 to 3 milligrams per kilo of body weight. That's quite an effective dose. And its half-life is around 6 hours. So you can factor that in too and have around 1 to 3 milligrams every 6 hours. But again and again, practice this, because caffeine is one of those products that can really affect our stomachs. So it is really important that we practice this during training. So you finished your race, and although you'll probably be celebrating, you do also need to recover and make sure your recovery is started as soon as possible. So essentially there's the principle of the 4 R's, and this is refuel, repair, rehydrate, and rest. And when we say refuel, this is topping up those carb stores that you've just been using during the race. A rule of thumb is at least 1 gram per kilogram of body weight of easy to absorb carbs. So you probably had plenty enough of carb drinks or gels at this point, but it's probably a really useful way of getting in carbs straight away is just to have a sports drinks mix. You're probably sick of it at that point, but if you can stomach it, it's a really good way to refuel those carb stores. If not, things like sweets, pasta, white bread, anything like this will be also just as good. At the end of my Ironman, they gave us pizza. So again, brilliant form of carbs. So the second R was repair. So this is looking at getting in enough protein to help repair the damaged muscle tissue. Obviously in half and full Ironmans, there's going to be plenty of damaged muscle tissue. So getting in enough protein during this point is really important. So we want to be aiming for around 20 grams of protein in that first meal. And you can get this in via either a protein shake or meat, fish, milk, whatever you kind of find necessary. It doesn't have to be exact. The same with the carbs. It's just a good guide, and it's just to help you recover as best as you can. So if you don't get it that straight in after, but you go for a big dinner and you have, say, like a big bowl of pasta with chicken, it's likely you're going to hit these numbers. So the third R was rehydrate, and you want to aim to replace around 125 to 150% of your sweat loss over 4 to 6 hours after the race. Now, that's also not very useful numbers because you're not going to have a weighing scales at the end of your race. So as a rule of thumb, 300 to 500 mil per hour after your race for 4 to 6 hours is probably a good guide. Like I said, you can practice it in your training, so you can see how much you maybe lose, but it is worth taking into account. Obviously, race day is going to be a bit different, with obviously higher intensity, and possibly the weather could be different as well. So it's just important to continue to drink, and also make sure you get in sodium there too. So either an electrolyte tablet or just eating some salty snacks, or putting in a bit of extra salt on your food afterwards. So I'm just also going to mention here about training your gut. So this is something that is a talk all in itself, and it's something that you would do during your training, but I just wanted to quickly mention it here as well, because races aren't until maybe a few months' time, so you may have a chance to really train your gut if you do have, say, GI issues, or you can't take in enough food during your races. So like I said, 60 to 90 grams is a lot per hour, and if you're not used to it, this can be really hard to get in. So just like how competitive food eaters train their gut and can train their stomach, you can train yours as well. So this will be done by eating more, as well as just taking in more sports gels or sports drinks to help train your gut to get used to what it's being put into its body. So if you do get GI issues, you can just start to train your gut to get used to absorbing more carbohydrates and absorbing those kind of quick release carbohydrates. So a good way to know if it's effective is if you're not getting any, say, cramps or diarrhea or any sort of symptoms of GI distress. So if you are getting those, it might be that you want to start just reducing your nutrition and slowly adding it in to see if you can try and train your gut to take in more on a regular basis. So you can maybe do this over a few weeks. It's also important that maybe when you do this, to be near home or be somewhere where you might have a toilet, as if you do have really bad GI issues, then you really want to be kind of training your body to take in more. And in the first instance, you may have to hop along to the toilet a bit more on a regular basis. So if it's not the GI issues and it's just the amount you're taking in, you can reduce the amount for a little bit and then start to slowly increase that. If you're reducing it too much, then it might actually be worth looking at different products and see if your body can maybe handle different products, as it might be the product specifically that's actually causing you issues. So that's the kind of main talk around nutrition during your race week and your race day, and obviously post-race. So whilst I was kind of writing this talk, I kind of realised that there was lots of like quick tips that were quite useful that was around nutrition, but maybe some things I've learned or other people have kind of told me. So I thought I'd kind of just run off some quick fire tips just to finish before we have any questions, just as things, like I said, that I found really useful. So race pace is key to your nutrition, first of all. Someone who's doing a 9-hour Ironman will need a very different strategy to someone doing a 14-hour Ironman. So make sure you know how long you are likely to go for and fuel for this. Equally, on the other end, things can go wrong. So basically fuel for the inevitable. It's better to have more on you than less. If you get a mechanical or an injury, it's better to just have more with you and make sure that you fuel for a bit of a longer duration just in case. So next one is it's worth practicing your swim to bike transition, as this is often quite neglected. So you want to know how your body copes from going from that swim to that bike, especially if you're doing a long distance, and whether you need nutrition during this time. So it could be that you actually do feel a bit fatigued straight after, so maybe getting in something during T1 is really useful, but just practice that during your training, as that's something that's neglected quite often and it should be worth practicing. So another tip is very personal on what products you use, so don't kind of go by what your friend likes to use, or just use what you find best. I personally don't like Morton gels. I really love High Five gels. So it's best to use what you find best for you and what your body works well with. So practice during training. Try loads of different products. Another point is practicing nutrition is on the turbo. So it's a really good way to practice your nutrition is when you're sitting on the turbo. However, you do need to practice in the real world. When you're sitting on the turbo, you can just sit up. You can take your hands off the handlebars. You can pick up your food off the dining room table, and it can be quite easy. On race day, or in the real world when you're on the road, you're going to have potholes. You're going to be going downhill. You're going to be changing gear. So make sure you practice it during actually going out on the bike as well, and also out on your run. Another tip as well is possibly on the bike is to split up eating the food with gels. So one thing I like to do is have a gel, then 20 minutes later have something whole food based, so a bar or saurine or something like that. Then next have another gel. So it just kind of splits it up, and it personally I find it helps my stomach a bit better. It's also worth putting some extra gels or even something like flat Coke, which is a really nice energy source, into your transition bag. This can be just quite nice to, if you are feeling a little bit lethargic, just to quickly have a sip on your or a gel quickly during transition, or even just whilst you're running to say like the next transition line, just to try and get that quick hit of carbs. Something I find really useful is setting an alarm on my Garmin, and you can set it to, I think, whatever timings you want. I've got it for 15 minutes, and it basically shouts at you saying eat. So you can set this on your Garmin, and this is a really useful tool to remind yourself when to eat or when to drink. Practice everything at race pace. So it's all well and good practicing this during your long kind of steady 4-hour ride or 2-hour ride on a weekend, but you want to be practicing on your race pace as well, because your body's going to respond a lot differently to those harder efforts. So it's very much worth practicing during your race pace efforts as well. And then my final tip is just to practice the timings prior to the race. So this is practicing carb loading, practicing your race morning from getting up in the morning early, practicing your meal beforehand, practicing your hour before your race, and then practicing your race day nutrition as well. So that is everything from me. I did see there was a few questions that have come through, so I'm happy to answer any questions. Sam's on there as well, so if you want to shout out any questions, and I can't actually see the box, so if Richard wants to ask them, I'm happy for that as well. But thank you everyone for listening.
Sorry everyone, I was just I had my mics all turned off, because I didn't think anyone wanted to listen to me heavy breathing as we went through. Mostly thanks so much, Vicky, that was excellent. Really appreciate that. And yeah, we've had some really good questions come in, which I'll fire at you in a second. There's just one point that I kind of wanted to emphasize from like a coaching perspective, is that guys, really take the time to kind of plan this stuff in advance and for your training as well. We're obviously talking about race nutrition, and as Vicky has kind of emphasised quite rightly, you want to practice this stuff, and that starts with the planning. So don't I think also kind of be a little bit what's the expression, critical of the sports nutrition products out there, and make sure you check what's on the labels. So just as a quick example, I use this brand, which I'll cover up. Don't know why I decided to show that. But they're basically quite a thin gel. You get various different types of gel, but that's only packing about, I don't know, 17 grams of carb, which might be slightly better for the run. That's why I use them. But you might want to kind of nuance your selection a little bit. It doesn't just have to be one brand that you use. And as I say, get using this information in your training, because these are principles all apply to your training as well, and ultimately will assist with consistency. I don't think it's a huge leap of logic to say that if your training is properly fueled and you're applying these principles, for instance, the 60 to 90 grams of carb per hour, etc., your training is going to be better quality. You're going to recover quicker and you're going to be able to go again quicker. So that's just a couple of points from my perspective. Basically, this is really worth spending the time over and getting sorted out. Anyway, you didn't come here to listen to me, so let's get into the questions. So the first one on the Zoom chat, and just quickly, for anybody that's on the live stream, we have got the various chats coming into us. So if you're watching the live stream and you've got a question, do fire it into the comments box. We will pick it up. So the first question from the Zoom guys is from Chantal. If we have to travel 1 hour or so to the start, could you have something like overnight oats in transit? Just something to eat a bit later, get more sleep. So that's the first question from Chantal. I don't know if Vicky or Sam wants to take that one.
Yeah, so I would, well, if it's going back to kind of eating, whether you prefer to eat like 4 to 2 hours before. So I would always suggest possibly, I mean, if you're going to be transiting, you're probably going to be getting there around an hour before anyway. So if you do need to eat, say it's an hour journey and you want to be eating 2 hours before, that's fine as well. It just might be that you possibly change the amount you have, depending on how you feel going into the swim and how full you are. In terms of overnight oats, yeah, it's a brilliant option. I use them because it means that you don't have to worry about, I mean, I've been in a hotel room just before a event, and the worst thing you want to do is try and figure out how to make your breakfast. So things like overnight oats is a really good, useful way of getting in those carbs in the morning. And then obviously you're going to get more sleep in because you don't have to get up early and prepare them. So yeah, that's a really good option.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love overnight oats. They're a great snack option as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question came from Chantal. I find that I wake up in the night hungry, or in the morning hungry, despite going to bed full and having eaten well during the day. Any advice on that one?
Yeah, so primarily if you are waking up hungry, you may have eaten well in the day, you may have eaten like a really kind of wholesome meals and stuff, but I would say that if you're waking up hungry, you're probably not eating enough the day before and you're not eating enough calories. So it might be worth considering just upping your calorie intake ever so slightly. You can do this slowly, like you don't have to suddenly add in 500 calories. Like it might just be that you need kind of an extra 100 or 200, but it would be worth adding in extra calories, especially if you're doing a hard training session, just to see if you can stop or reduce that hunger when you wake up. That would be the primary cause that I would say. So yeah, I would, in the first instance, up your calories to see if that would help.
Okay, great. So next question we've got is from Mike, I believe. I assume this is asking about the 48 hours pre-race. It's just basically asking, it's not just carbohydrates, is it? What about kind of other macronutrients, to paraphrase?
Yeah, so obviously the 48 hours before in that carb loading phase, so obviously I was just mentioning carb loading, so that was just kind of looking at the carbs, but equally you do want to be getting in all of the other macronutrients, so you do want to be having a whole diet of getting in fats and protein. It's just that carb loading, you want to be getting in enough carbs, and if you're going to get in loads of carbs, it might be that actually you have to say reduce to a lower fat diet, because if you're getting in then say loads of fat as well, your calorie intake is going to be huge. So it's just maybe about adjusting the ratios between the fats and carbs so that you are hitting a higher amount of carbs than the rest of the macronutrients. Protein can stay steady throughout, so we want to be looking at around 1.8 to 2 grams per kilo of body mass of protein, and that can pretty much stay maintain for the whole entire week and throughout your training as well, just because we want to be obviously repairing and recovering our muscles, so getting in enough protein, and that can stay steady.
I would say as well, Vicky, just to add to that, is the type of carbohydrate that we should focus on as well during that carb load. So, normally we might be looking at more complex carbohydrates with high fiber content, but we kind of want to avoid that in the sort of 48 hours pre-race. If we're eating a lot of fiber, then that's going to cause potentially some GI issues on the day. We'll be potentially looking to the portaloos at some point during the day as well, which we obviously want to avoid. So it's having enough carbohydrate, but we would focus more on like simple carbohydrates in that case, rather than your more complex carbs. So things like white rice or white pasta are great options. Like personally, I eat about 5 packets of microwave rice, white rice, the day before a race, because it's just easy, simple carbs. And I think I've taken that from Cat Matthews, so I can't claim to have come up with that suggestion.
So when we're talking about low fiber stuff, we're talking basically, as you say, higher GI carbs, like basically white stuff, all the stuff that we try and avoid most of the year. Basically. Yeah.
Rich, what I would say is linked to that, and this is something that we've come across with a few athletes recently, because we're trying to eat a well-balanced diet with complex carbohydrates, normally, then we want to switch to these more high GI, simple carbohydrates pre-race in the days before race. Some people don't tolerate that well. So it is actually something that we should probably practice as well. And maybe before our big days, if we have a big day on a Saturday, maybe look at the Friday, that you then start to shift your types of carbohydrates that you're having slightly in that, when we're talking about training sessions, and then obviously that'll help you do that when it comes to the race as well.
Okay, great. So we've got a few more questions, and we've still got about 9 minutes or so. So one of the requests for advice from Caroline was just any example meals. Caroline, is there a particular kind of context in which you're asking about that? I'll just move on to another question whilst you're kind of just clarifying that point. Unless you guys have anything that immediately springs to mind, I think it might be helpful to know the context in that one. Just one question I had about the kind of during principles. Obviously we've got a lot of people joining this that are bike racers. How do those during principles apply to a sort of say 2 hour plus bike race? I mean, do you shift? How does that intensity shift as you move towards the kind of the end of a bike race? How does that change?
I can answer this, or Sam can chip in after, but the principles are still the same. So obviously if you're doing an endurance event, you're still wanting to look at the same amount of carbs per hour. It might be that because it's possibly a shorter event than an Ironman, or it's only say like a 2 hour bike ride, it could be that actually you can tolerate, say, just gels during that point, or even just getting in, say, a couple of bottles of sports mix, because then you're actually going to get in those really easily available carbs straight away. And then but it's likely that you probably won't need, say, like whole foods during that point, because it's a shorter race, but it's likely to be more higher intensity. So possibly getting in the quicker release carbs in the sports mix or the gels is going to be your best option for those. I don't know, Sam, if you had anything for that as well.
I mean, yeah, you covered it there, really. I think a bit, in many ways it mirrors what we might do in a 70.3 or an Ironman, that we want to almost preload on the bike. So we try and hit that 90, maybe 100, 110, even 120 grams of carbs per hour to kind of get ahead, if we like, make sure we're fueled. So when the racing does become more intense later on, and there are fewer opportunities to take on nutrition, that we're sort of already covered in that respect. Obviously, you can't just ignore it for the last 2 hours of a race or whatever, but you've set yourself up to finish strong. And then, yeah, like Vicky says, you'd shift to your gels or your carb drink to get it in easily.
Okay, great. And just on that final point on the carb drink, just as a little steer, what sort of ratios are you talking about in terms of carbohydrate mix? So, for instance, there's always the debate over the use of carbohydrate drinks as fueling or as opposed to hydration.
So do you mean in terms of like how much you would have?
Yeah, how much carbohydrate as opposed carbohydrate to fluid ratio?
You're still probably looking at around, most kind of carb mixes kind of put in a spoonful, I think, is around 50 grams to 60 grams of carbs. So that's kind of, it's dependent on the actual drinks mix itself. I know that Morton have like a drinks mix and they recommend how much to put it in water. So it's very much dependent on the product. But what I would say is just take into account how much you're putting into your bottle. So if you are putting in 60 grams into your water bottle and you're having, say, 2 water bottles, that's 120 grams. So take that into account for your race as well. So if you obviously do need to top up with water, but also it might be that actually you'd prefer to have a bottle of water and a bottle of sports mix. So it is very independent and personal preference, as well as product specific, I would say.
Nice one. Okay, cool. Okay, so last couple of points. So coming back to Caroline's question. So the question was before race day, and then Chantel's got a similar kind of question and wants to know what everyone's favourite pre-race meals are.
So in terms of just the good meals before a race, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
But again,
carb loading, Vicky.
Yeah, it's all just very personal preference. So, like, going on to that second question, I love a pasta before. So, and something that works really well for me is just kind of white pasta. Really simple is something like pesto or, just mega simple. But it's whatever works best for you for that pre-race meal. So I know people have pizza before. I don't think that's probably the most ideal one, but things like white rice, pasta, maybe with some white bread on the side, for instance, is a really good way to kind of get in that last lot of fueling. So I don't know if you guys have your personal favourites. No, Sam's is 5 bags of white rice.
Yeah, a lot of white rice. What I would say is pizza, the Brownlees, apparently that's what they have, so it's done all right for them. But I think one thing I would say, if you're travelling to a race, try and take your own food. But of course, it's not always possible if you're abroad. An Italian's a great option in that case, but you just have to be selective with what you have and have very simple, a margarita pizza or something, or a vegetarian pizza. Very simple. You don't want spicy. Avoid that. If you're having pasta, then avoid a carbonara and have something like just pasta with tomato sauce or something very very straightforward. It's all about function in those few days before, rather than really tasty, enjoyable food in many ways.
I'd also just kind of point on that as well, is it's probably worth just taking out any risk from any food. So anything like, I'd probably avoid things like shellfish, because especially if you're going to maybe go to a restaurant, just avoid anything that might possibly upset your stomach or possibly might give you some sort of like food poisoning or anything like that. So yeah, maybe any raw meat or sushi, should probably avoid that as well. So just try and be really safe on the foods that you're eating.
And definitely avoid any spice, guys. I can tell you that from recent experience. I won't go into the details, but it is not pleasant. Okay, moving very swiftly on. Yeah, so just got a couple of minutes left. So no meat before. That's an interesting question. I suppose that again comes down to personal preference, doesn't it?
Is that a question saying, should they eat meat before?
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that can, obviously you can keep kind of protein in your diet. There's no reason why you can't have meat. I mean, Sam, do you have a different take on that?
My only thinking is that you are going to eat a lot. You're going to have eaten a lot of food in that day leading up to the race, and if you're having, meat the evening before, it might, fill you up quite a lot, and you already might be quite full. It's protein, something like chicken or beef or something is very satiating, so it fills you up. So you might then struggle to finish your carbohydrates, and that's really what you want. So it's just about keeping it simple, really, and that, I suppose that's why we've come with those suggestions, that it's just very simple, especially that evening meal, because you also don't want it to fill you up to a point where you're having trouble sleeping, so it's impacting on your sleep quality the night before a race. I mean, many of us don't sleep that well the night before a race anyway, so maybe it's not too much of an issue. But and I think, Vicky, you touched on this anyway, about sort of making most of the carbs come earlier in the day as well. So it's almost like, I always think the evening meal the day before a race is almost the smallest feeding occasion or meal of that day, in terms of calories and carbs, really.
Okay, awesome, guys. I think so. On RGT, we've got just under 7Ks left of the course. So, guys, I think so that Vicky and Sam can enjoy the rest of their evening, it's probably best if we kind of bring things to a close there. But just if you want to stay on RGT and finish the course, absolutely fair enough, crack on. But I think we've probably taken up enough of their time. I think I would speak for everybody when I say that was extremely useful. And as I said earlier, guys, really take the time to plan this stuff and how you're going to fit it into your training, into your racing. It's really worth it, alongside kind of doing your normal kind of race preparations. Nutrition is one of the things that can make the biggest difference, and can also cause some of the biggest issues, as I kind of insinuated earlier. But yeah, I think if there's any very quick questions, we might be able to squeeze them in. Otherwise, just a quick reminder that you can find the link to the Total Endurance Nutrition website on the RIAK online page, and they are one of our training partners. And yeah, check out the website, book yourself a free consultation with one of their nutritionists. But yeah, otherwise, I think all that remains to be said, unless anything's come in very quickly. Yeah, as Sam says on the Zoom feed, guys, do feel free to drop them or us a question if you have any nutrition related questions. Obviously, we'll field the hard ones to them. But yeah, thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate your time, and yeah, thanks so much, and we'll hope to see you again on a session soon.
Thank you very much for having us as well.
No worries, guys. Okay,
Bye.
awesome. Right then, I'll finish the live stream there.